Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco dishing out on movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. And it's just Marco here once again. I am here today to review a documentary, another Netflix documentary, and this one is Jimmy Savile, a British horror story. And first off, I don't know why I did this because, as you guys saw, or maybe you didn't see, I reviewed the one about the Nielsen tapes where they kind of lied and they said that you get to hear his words the whole documentary, and then the documentary was mostly just a bunch of boring BS that, it wasn't really that interesting and it wasn't his words. And so it was very just dull and waste of time. Waste of 2 hours. Well, you thought that a waste of 2 hours was bad. This was a waste of 3 hours. This Jimmy Savile documentary. And, for starters, obviously, I'm not going to say any mean things about any of the victims. This review doesn't reflect on them, obviously. So, I'm not discouraging them. I am just discouraging the people who made this documentary and thought that this was good. Because I don't know if Netflix knows this, but true crime is a very popular topic. A lot of people love true crime, especially women, and they love looking up stories of sex abuse, murder abuse, torture abuse, any kind of abuse, really. They hate it, but they love to look at it, and they love to read about it, and they love to hear about it. It kind of says something a little bit about these types of people, and personally, I like researching serial killers because it's an interesting subject to learn about these people who are more like monsters than people, and it's interesting to learn about, oh, that person was like that, and they had this persona in public and private, and they did all these things, and very weird things to learn about without uh, without being too over the top, in terms of I don't like doing it for a long period of time, as I said in the last video, because it puts you in a dark mood. And so I don't really look into true crime as much, but I am very intelligent in the true crime world. I mean, I know a lot about true crime, and I've already known about Jimmy Savile, and I heard all this stuff about him. I heard about how he was partners with the Yorkshire Ripper. I heard about how he was inside the palace with all those royal pedophiles in Britain, and I heard uh, that he was best friends with Myra Hindley, and that he dyed his hair blonde, bleach blonde, because of Myra Hindley. I mean, I already knew all this stuff. And so I went into this documentary thinking, okay, this is 3 hours long. I really hope that this is worth my time, because I could have been watching and reviewing another Betty Davis movie, or I could have been watching and reviewing another independent movie. But instead, I chose to watch this. And I'm pissed off because this was a fucking waste of time. It was just a giant waste of resources, of time. It was just made to get easy money from true crime. What do you call those types of people? True crime fanatics. You know, people who are attracted to true crime for subconscious reasons that they can't admit to, because it would reflect poorly on them. Uh, this was terrible. It was really bad. Like this might be the worst thing that I've seen the whole year in terms of film, in terms of TV. Like, this might be worse than Halo. And that's saying something because I quit Halo after the first episode. I tried watching episode 2 and I can't do it. So it says something that this is the worst thing of the year. Because it had potential. Like, this is an interesting subject. You know, you have this character who is protected by all these rich pedophiles and all these rich people and, all these police who wouldn't let abuse victims have their cases go to court. You know, a lot of corruption involved in this that basically just exposes the entire country of Britain. That, like, they have this big secret, the fact that they let this pedophile run around and rape people and molest young children and kill people, and, like, it's pretty bad. It's it's pretty embarrassing, to say the least. Like, thank God I have never, like, people say some bad things about me. Like, when I reviewed Fargo season 4, I got called a KKK clan member because I didn't like Fargo season 4. Well, it's like, yeah, you can say all these bad things, but at least you can never say that I enabled a disgusting, murderous pedophile. You know what I mean? Like, it's pretty bad, okay? And in this documentary, I thought my one and only worry was, is this gonna be a mainstream BS documentary where it's very one-sided, very slanted, distorted, typical 2022 biased documentary? Is this going to scratch the surface of this character? Is it going to reveal anything interesting? Is it going to get into details of, what happened with him and Myra Hindley? Is it going to actually say anything worthwhile? No, of course not, because it's 2022 and Netflix just wants to make another waste of time documentary that basically this could have been a 10-minute YouTube video, it could have been a 10-minute documentary. I mean, the whole thing kind of felt like some sort of an edgelord who just discovered Jimmy Savile, went on YouTube, and he just, like, did a 30-minute investigation into his interviews, and he's like, ooh, there's an interview where he flirts with another woman. Oh no. And he clicked on the interview and he's like, ooh, did you see there in the interview where his fingers moved around? And it's like, it's clearly symbolizing that his fingers are sexually motivated in this pause of body language. Like, that kind of BS. I mean, it just felt so surface level. Like, I guess this is for true crime normies. This is for people who, they didn't know about him, and so they can watch this 3-hour bore fest and waste their time finding out about this when, they'll forget about it in an hour or so when they move on to the next true crime documentary. Like, ooh, it's the evening now. Time to have a dinner and a serial killer documentary chill with my BF and my other BF and his other BF and his other GF. It's time to watch another one. Oh no, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I gotta watch another documentary. Ooh, this guy kept his daughter in an underground dungeon and he made scorpions crawl on her. Ooh, that one sounds good. Ooh. And, it's just very basic. This is a basic bitch documentary. There's nothing really new at all that's revealed. It is just 3 hours of... Well, first off, this is a quote-unquote limited series, which is code for a long-ass movie that they're too scared to call a movie, because then retards on Twitter will complain and say, why are there 3-hour movies? There have never been 3-hour movies until 2022. So they call it a limited series. The first half is the build-up. It's, this was his public persona. He did all these things. He did all this charity and stuff. And then you had, this was probably there were a couple of worst parts of this fucking trash. First off, there were a lot of weird shots in this documentary of close-up shots of people's faces just looking into the camera and sort of glaring into the camera and like glaring at the audience who's watching this. Like there was this one fat TV critic, and he might be he looked like a troll or something, and he just stares into the camera and like just makes these weird faces at the audience. And I'm thinking, like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, this is what? Ew. Like, ew. We're watching this Jimmy Savile documentary, and who do we have to talk about him? We have a TV critic, who looks pretty creepy himself, staring into the camera and glaring at the audience because we didn't get him another pot pie. We didn't get him another meat pie from fucking Sweeney Todd's girlfriend's meat pies, Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, so he's very upset that he didn't get his third meat pie for dinner, his third dinner helping of meat pies. I mean, that's the type of shit that we get into in this documentary. We have all these weird shots of people just looking into the camera, and it got so gross. Ugh. It got so gross that I couldn't look at the documentary anymore. I could only listen to it, and so I turned off the screen and I just went to something else. I went to look at something else, a game. In fact, I think I played Monopoly online, or I played and then I played Kirby and Dream Land Part 2. That's a fun game. And I played that while I listened to this mess of a documentary. And so you already have that, which... Okay, you already have that to turn off your appetite. And here's another thing, too. I was eating breakfast while watching this. I mean, it was very hard to eat breakfast while watching this trash. And then we get to the second part. So the whole first part was a huge waste of time. I mean, it was basically just... especially if you're British watching this, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard all this a million times. Like, oh wow, he ran a show called Jim'll Fix It? Whoa, I never knew that before. And so that's like the whole entire hour and 20 minutes. That's the length of a 1930s movie, okay? And so you already wasted an entire movie length explaining to me things that I've already heard. I already knew that before. And then we get into the second half where, quote unquote, everything is going to be revealed. And there's this warning that says that these descriptions of abuse will be said in the documentary. And it's like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Like, I think I already figured that out when I clicked onto the Jimmy Savile documentary. Like, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It would be the equivalent of having a Ted Bundy documentary, and then at the beginning saying, warning, there will be scary situations in this documentary. Like, what's next? Like, are they going to have, like, fucking, on horror movies like The Shining? Ooh, there will be horror in The Shining. A horror movie. Like, wow. Thanks. I really needed to know that because my brain is just so small that I couldn't figure that out. So we get to the second half of this disaster of a documentary. It was a huge disaster. If this wins awards, like, of course, award shows, they're really not they're really not good. But if they give this awards, it'll really just be because of things that don't have to do with the actual documentary. Because this was bad. This was really, really bad. Like I honestly, I really wish that I hadn't watched this crap because it was such a fucking waste of time. I mean, thanks a lot, Netflix. Thanks a lot for wasting my time. I mean, everyone's time is valuable. And thanks for wasting everyone else's time too with this stupid trash documentary. I mean, what a waste. What a complete waste. And of course they have all this sinister music and this just these contrived things. And oh yeah, the worst part of the first part, besides the weird guy staring at you and the people staring at you through the camera, which they had all these shots where people were watching footage of themselves and they were saying, "Oh, that's me," and they're like pointing at the camera. But the thing was I was wondering, why couldn't you just move the camera from the front of their faces to the side? Like, show them looking at the screen, show the screen on the right, show their faces on the left, and then they point at the screen. That would be so much better than having a shot of someone close up of their face pointing at the camera like this is some sort of a raunchy comedy movie where, you know, it's like it's some sort of a meta Marvel joke. Like, I don't know, it's weird. It's just so bizarre. The filmmaking choices in this documentary were really bizarre. But the worst part of the first part, which I give the first part an F minus, and then like, okay, maybe an F. I raise it. No, actually, I still give it an F minus, but I give the victims an A plus. Okay, obviously they get an A plus. They're not to blame for this shit documentary, obviously. But the worst part was when they had this little section where he was doing an interview with this old man and a woman, and she was also showing herself now, 2022, and it was just this very hilariously awkward sort of thing where she's trying to make it seem like it's very sinister that he's like flirting with her and he's being like raunchy with her, like he's like, "Oh, will you come over here and kiss me in my sleeping bag? I bet a lot of boys wish you'd do that to them." Ha 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 ha. And she comes over and does it, and she's like, you know, modern day, she's like, "The camera lied because the camera lied. I wasn't having fun. This was it was just the stupidest thing ever. Because, like, this is a grown woman and a grown man. It's not like this is a teenage girl that he's acting inappropriate with. This is a grown woman who's complaining about how he asked her to go have Christmas dinner with him and have tea. And it's like, this is just stupid. This is just fucking, like, what is this, a Me Too documentary where, like, you're gonna have all this contrived BS and talking about, like, "Oh no, there was this little incident where he brushed up against my shoulder, and I was thinking at first, oh, this is just a light brush, but then I thought about how shoulders can be attractive to some people." You know, like this type of bullshit. Like, is this really what this documentary is gonna do? Just very, very weird. That was stupid. That was such a bullshit segment. Totally cut out. Cut that out. 20 minutes out of this shit. Okay, so that's already 20 minutes waste of time. Could have cut this whole fucking thing down to just the victims talking, and that's it. Okay, a little YouTube video, that's it. On Netflix's official page. That's all that was worthwhile in this shit documentary. And then what else? You had him talking about how his motivation for doing all this charity was so that he could get into heaven, and that he could have like a list, and he could say, these are all the good things I've done, next to all the bad things that he's done, basically. And that should have been a red flag, because that was literally just him saying that all the stuff that he does and all these shows that he does are just so that he can feel good about himself. And number two, it was really weird because they called him a Catholic. They called this fucking retard a Catholic. And you know this guy's a Satanist. He's totally a Satanist. And so I thought that was pretty funny. They called him a Catholic. It's like these documentarians, they don't even know anything about Jimmy Savile. It's hilarious. And then in the second part, well, they also, what's funny is they show all this stuff, and then they never explain it. They never explain why they're focusing in on things. So they had this one shot where they showed a close-up of the glass eyeballs on his fingers, the glass eyeball rings, and it's like, okay, this is some sort of an in-depth documentary about Jimmy Savile. And they don't even talk about how those glass eyes were taken out of corpses in the hospital. Like, they never even mention that. They couldn't be bothered to mention, like, these glaringly obvious things. It just feels like this documentary, creepy enough, this documentary feels like it was made to honor him rather than to talk about his abuse, because this documentary, it doesn't even really go into that much detail. And it's like, you know, who are you helping? Who's benefiting from this documentary? You know, the victims aren't, because people already knew this stuff. The police aren't, because they don't care. They love abusers. They love murderers and rapists. You know, they don't care. And then, are you benefiting the Yorkshire Ripper victims? Oh, no, of course not, because you didn't talk about that. You know, you didn't talk about how he was partners with the Yorkshire Ripper. You didn't talk about the Royals, of course, because you're never going to talk about them until you get rid of the stupid royal family. And then finally it'll be like, oh, did you know that those people were bad? Oh, I never would have figured that out until Netflix told me in their mainstream documentary that just scratches the surface and it doesn't really bother to ask any important questions. And just, so you get to the second half, and it is another hour and a half long of waste of time. Like, just, it was like, what are we watching? What am I watching here? This is such a waste. Like, just, what is going on? Like, they talk about how, like, and that's another thing, too. Like, they're so fucking lazy that they couldn't even be bothered to explain much and go into in-depth explanations. And so they just had these little captions that said, did you know Jimmy Savile abused people in the mental institutions? Oh my God, I never knew that. And so they couldn't even be bothered to like go in depth about that. They just say that in a little caption card. I mean, what a fucking waste. What a fucking, this pisses me off. This documentary pisses me off. And the second half, it literally just goes into like the basics, the bare basics. Not even the bare basics of like, oh, survivors came forward. They were ignored by the police. And then reporters tried to tell the story. They were told not to do it. And then after he died, they did it and stuff happened and that's it. It's like, God, this was a waste of time. It was just like, this was so unnecessary. It was just a boring mess. And in fact, this was so boring. This was getting so painstakingly boring that I put this on 1.5 speed because I was so bored. I was so bored at this slow-moving BS documentary that didn't even reveal anything new or interesting, that I put it on 1.5 speed, and I was just like, yeah, let's get this shit over with. I can't wait to do another negative video where I have to sound like a jackass because this documentary's trash. I can't wait to do that. Just such a terrible experience of a documentary. And then in the last 10 minutes, they have like this terribly dramatic music where it's like dun, 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 and they're having all these like fast-paced allegations, like just cramming all this stuff in the last 5 minutes, and then they literally run out of time, and they're like, oopsie, we couldn't be bothered to really give you the full story because that'll be in the next documentary, Jimmy Savile Unmasked Again. And then in the next documentary, Jimmy Savile Unmasked Again. And then in the next documentary, we'll finally get to the truth of who he really was. I mean, the hilarious thing about all this is the fact that the whole documentary, their main theme is that of his public and private persona, and the fact that you really didn't know anything about him. He was a mystery, and there was this part where the critics talked about his book, and they said, even though I love this book, because I love everything about Jimmy Savile, I didn't feel like I knew you at all, and so I'd really like to know you more. And he's like, oh, how about we go out for some tea? And then I can abuse you. And then you can talk about it in a book yourself. It'll be an anecdote. It's like that's what it was. But it's funny how, like, the whole documentary, they focus on that, and they say, like, we didn't know anything about him. It's like he's like a weird mystery. And it's like, well, it's funny that they criticize that about him, but then this whole documentary, they never even show anything new. Like, they never even reveal really anything about him. The only thing that I thought was funny, which would make me just completely never pay attention to him again, was the part where he says, I like to do charity because then when I'm at Heaven's Gate, I can pull up a piece of paper that says all the good things I did for people. And then God will look at my piece of paper and I will get into heaven. He probably, that's just, it just, there's some truth to that, but there's also some bullshit because, he knew that he wasn't going anywhere. He knew, what was going to happen to him. And so it's pretty funny and weird, the fact that he give that answer, because it's literally just a tell-all about his personality, is that he, even though he's a Satanist and he doesn't even care about heaven or hell or anything, even though he's a Satanist, he just told you his whole life that, he knows he's a bad guy, and he knows he does a lot of bad things, but he does a lot of good things too, so those outweigh the bad things. And he doesn't even admit to the bad things either, which is pretty bad itself. And so that should tell you everything you need to know. Why would you associate with someone who is just going to spend their whole life making up for bad things? It's one thing to be like, like the Wolf of Wall Street, where he did bad things. Now he's on a redemption path, hopefully, and he's doing good things completely. It's one thing to be like that, where he, like, admitted everything he did, all that stuff. But it's another thing to be like a Jimmy Savile, where you say you're doing all these good things, but you're not admitting to the bad things. You're not stopping the bad things. So it's like a weird thing where he's mad that Santa Claus is gonna leave him off the nice list, and so he's got to make his own nice list of nice things that he's done. I give this documentary an F minus. This was a total waste of time. It was everything I thought it was going to be for a terrible, pointless, mainstream Netflix documentary. They just make these documentaries to get views. You know, it's an easy thing. Instead of making a show that they cancel after a first season, they'll just make a little documentary where it's just lasting for one day, and it's just mainstream BS that they don't really go into depth about anything. They don't talk about how he loved Myra Hindley and she was like his idol, and you know, he probably effed her in prison too, and he probably did a lot of fun stuff with her. You know, he dyed his hair. I mean, his hair. One of the key things about him as a person is his hair, his weird white hair that makes him look like it makes him look like he's a ghost or something. You know, why is that? Because he dyed his hair as an inspiration from her. I mean, it's like, God, the people who make these documentaries are a bunch of nitwits. Like, they really, like, they didn't really talk about anything important at all. It was just a huge waste of time. And this review is a waste of time, too. I mean, guys, I had about 4 or 5 nightmares last night in a row, and they were all a lot more interesting and entertaining than this. Like, there was one where, like, I was in this dark wooden house, and I was being trained by these 2 police officers, these detectives, on how to look at and how to deal with crime scenes or something. And they were talking about maggots and things, and how maggots are everywhere or something. Like, it was really weird. And then all of a sudden, there was a maggot inside of my beard, and I had to flick the maggot off, and it was really gross, and I could feel like it was, like, really happening to me, and it was, like, it was such an interesting and fun nightmare. You know, I love nightmares when they're fun and interesting, and so, you know, I have fun with that. I didn't have fun with this. I didn't have fun with this 3-hour waste of time. Okay, so this documentary gets an F minus. Fuck this documentary. Waste of time. Don't waste your time watching this documentary. Just look up stuff about him. You'll find out a lot more. Like, there's so many interesting things to talk about, like how he was allowed to abuse people in hospitals, and he owned a mental institution, and they don't, like, honestly, you could probably make, like, a whole movie dealing with that, like how he owns an asylum and he's abusing people in this asylum. Like, you know, they don't even go into depth at all. They just state the obvious, like, oh wow, the abuser abused people in his mental asylum. Like, wow, that's a big revelation. Like, what's next? The sky is blue? Like, like, what's next? What's the next revelation? Netflix? Thanks for telling me that. I really needed to know that. So please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought of this pointless mainstream documentary, and then please subscribe, because honestly, this is a promise, I am never reviewing or watching a Netflix documentary again unless it has to do with my 2 top cases that I am most invested in, which is Herb Baumeister and Amy Lynn Bradley. If they do a documentary about either of those, no matter how pointless it is, I will watch those, because those are the 2 cases that I am most invested in personally. And those are the ones I've researched the most, too. I am the head person to go to if you want to know anything about Herb Baumeister, because I've been researching him for years, and there's a lot of stuff with him. His character is just as interesting as Jimmy Savile, and he is also another figure where he was rich, and so, you know, he could do anything he wanted, And so very, very interesting cases. And then, of course, Amy, she's also a very interesting case because still we don't know where she is or anything. And it would be like a mission of mine to find her and bring her home. And that to me is a lot more important than watching this mainstream shit documentary where nothing new is learned and it was just all a waste of time. So please subscribe and watch my other videos because I'm not reviewing this shit again. I'm not reviewing these fucking stupid normie documentaries for true crime normies on Netflix. So fuck this documentary and fuck Netflix. Okay, I mean, I'm not surprised that the same company that released Cuties is the same company that they released this documentary that just kind of scratches the surface and doesn't really do anything, except for all it really does is just get more people to talk about him and to kind of give his spirit more energy. I mean, that's literally all this review did, too. So, like, Netflix just made me give a serial killer energy, which is pretty creepy, pretty dark, pretty evil, if you ask me. So, yeah. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon!